different for some things. So you've just got to be really careful when you're benchmarking, as we'll go through when we read soil tests more next week on organic matter and things like that. And finally, one of the last golden rules to think about is that it's important not just to rely on soil tests just because it's spat out by a computer and there's colourful graphs on it and you think the person that gave it to you knows what they're doing. It doesn't mean that it tells you the whole story. You've got to get out in the paddock or the property and look at what's going on. Just because the soil test says, oh, the numbers aren't great, but if you go out and you see the pastures are going well, the animals are going well, or the crops are growing well, then you've got to go, okay, well, just because the soil test is not great, this paddock's actually going pretty well. This is an example for you down near home here at Wagga in New South Wales, and I was asked to do a due diligence on a Singaporean company that was investing in Australian agriculture, spending, $10-15 million sort of thing. And they asked me to assess this soil independently of the agronomist they were working with to get a third opinion. And I looked at the soil test and I said, look, there's no way I can recommend or not recommend that property until I go and see it. So just because the soil test numbers looked all right, we rocked up and you can see they'd prepared the ground by turning big clods into little clods. But that paddock's got a number of years of rehabilitation. And so unless they were willing to invest in a lot of, effort to fix that topsoil, but you wouldn't have picked that up off a soil test. You had to go and have a look to get that second check. So don't just use them on their own. It's like animals, you get a blood test and it'll tell you that the animal's short of this or that. Well, maybe it is, but maybe the genetics of the animal and the mob's actually adapted and it's pretty good. So last couple of things is that soil tests look confusing at first glance, and you can see here's the EAL test that you guys have been using. I'm going to show you some other tests from Inside Tech Pivot and other labs as well, because they're not usually laid out in a user-friendly way. So the problem with soil tests is that they're not laid out for the end user, i.e. you guys, the landholders. They're laid out by technical people who are not really considering the end user. But that's okay, because once you sort of know the secrets to soil tests, because there's just a few tips, once you know how to read them, it doesn't matter where they come from or how technical they look, you can just pull them apart, and that's what we're about to do now. But it is good if the font's sort of at least legible and you don't need a magnifying glass. So here's another test. This is from a different lab called SWEP, and you can see, just get that thing up there out of the way, you can see here it's laid out very differently, and this lab even gives you these pie charts. As you can see, they've even put things in a pie chart form, and that makes it really easy to read. Well, easier to read, but this doesn't matter whether they're giving you nice charts or not. There's some basic elements to soil tests. All soil tests have these common elements, and that's what I'm going to go through now with you, just step by step for the next 10 minutes. So I'm just going to pull apart a soil test, including the EAL test that you guys have, but I'll compare it to other tests so you can see that any decent soil test has these 5 things on them. So the first thing they have on them is indicators. Then they have the method, which is kind of telling you how they measured that thing. So, for example, phosphorus. The phosphorus is the indicator, available phosphorus, and then the method, well, how did they measure it? There's different ways to measure phosphorus. The unit of measurement, did they use centimeters or meters, etc.? And then your actual results, hopefully you got the results because that's what you paid for. And then sometimes they put a benchmarking on as well. So let's start and have a look at some tests. So you guys have got your tests, so I'll just pull up an example of an EAL test. So this is a slightly different one, but just to show you, you've got the same layout. So here's an EAL test. This is from the Northern Territory in Mount Catherine. And so you can see here that over on this side here, you've got what they're calling parameters. So they're all the different indicators or things that you want to learn about. So just like if we were assessing a person, we'd ask for their weight, their height, their hair color, if they've got any hair, unlike me, their skin color, if they're different ethnicity, whatever it is, you're getting all the different aspects of that person. So in the EAL test, they put them all on this side here. They're called indicators or parameters. So you can see for phosphorus, they got one here for phosphorus, and this is measuring phosphorus. And down here, they got one for pH. So you can see on this soil test, they got all the different indicators here in this column. And so a really comprehensive test will have lots of indicators. And you can see from your test under this project, you've got nearly 2 pages or a big full page of different things that they're giving you information on. The idea is to confuse the hell out of you so we can sell you lots of product. I'll show you another example of a different soil test again. So this is an Insightec pivot test. So Insightec pivot, most of you be aware of, they're the big fertilizer company. And so you can see here, and this is another test. This is a sugarcane field. And you can see here that they put all the indicators in this column here, and they call them, they have a slightly different name, they call them analyte. But they're just all the things that they're measuring for you: soil color, soil texture, pH, there's the phosphorus again, the calcium. So they're just measuring different things. So they're all the indicators. So all, you know, obviously a test, a good agricultural test has a good range of indicators that are the relevant things that you want to learn and that are relevant for your property and your grazing landscape if you're a grazier. Okay, so I'll just get my presentation back up. So that's the first thing that all soil tests have on them, are these indicators. Some have more than others, depending on what you've ordered through the lab. The second thing that's on a soil test is it'll have the method that they use to measure it. So I'm just going to grab that soil test again. So hopefully you can follow along with your test. But I'm just going down to the phosphorus. So if you can find your phosphorus, and just see if you can see your phosphorus indicator near the top, and you'll see this word Colwell. So just have a look, see if you can find Colwell. Let me know if you can find that Colwell on your soil test. Just give us the thumbs up. Yep, thanks Jeff and Linda. So yeah, righto, thanks Roger. You got it, Rowan, to Neil, everyone's finding it. It's pretty simple. But yeah, you can see here, I'll get you guys, your guys' soils up too. So I've got this is all your soils here. And so we're going up there. So everyone can see we've got this Colwell P. So that's the method that they've used to measure the phosphorus. So that's the method that they've used. And if you look down here, then just down a little bit, you'll see sulfur. If everyone can find sulfur just down from your phosphorus, you'll see that there's a different method. They call it KCL, an in-house KCL. So they're saying that that's the method that they use to extract the sulfur. And if you can just mute the telephone again, it's just I'm getting that background noise, if you wouldn't mind. Sorry about that. Thank you. So you can everyone see on the EAL test that they put the method in its own column? And the reason they do that is it's really important if you change labs or some different scientists use different methods. So phosphorus in Australia is measured in 1, 2, 3, at least 6 ways available phosphorus. So, you know, when we look at nutrients in the third webinar, you'll see that for you guys, the relevant one is Colwell, this one here. So you just got to be aware if you've got a different test like Rowan, you might have a different test. I'm looking for the Colwell P. So that's the method that we're using to measure the different indicators. So you should, a good soil test should tell you the methods used. Again, if I jump to this sugarcane paddock with the different lab from Insightec Pivot, you can see that they've put the method in brackets next to the indicator. They haven't put it in a separate column. The method, they've just put them in brackets next to the thing. So they've laid it out slightly differently, but that's what you're looking for. Have they measured phosphorus in the one that's relevant for me? They've used the right method. The third thing that you've got on your soil test is a unit of measurement for each indicator. So it's like if you ask me, Dave, how far away is the shop from your house? And I say to you 100, you don't know whether it's 100 kilometers, 100 meters, or 100 miles. You have no idea until I tell you kilometers or meters or whatever. So it's the same with soils. Just because you've got a phosphorus level of 5, you don't know whether that means 5 kilograms per hectare or 5 milligrams or how's it measured. So you can see here on the EAL tests down in the parameter line, if you have a look carefully next to each of your indicators, they've given you the unit of measurement. So can everyone see for phosphorus, they've got milligrams per kilogram. So see if you can see that and the same up here for sulfur, milligrams per kilogram. So they use milligrams per kilogram, thanks to Neil. So that's the key unit of measurement. Does anyone know the equivalent unit of measurement to milligrams per kilogram? There's actually an equivalent unit of measurement that's exactly the same. It's equal 1-to-1, but it's also commonly used with soils. It starts with P, so parts per million. Thanks, Jeff. That's it. So you've got parts per million, ppm. So that's exactly the same. That's equivalent to milligrams per kilogram. So you can use the two units interchangeably. And if everyone can see just down a little bit on your soil test, which is electrical conductivity, that one there, just down a little ways down your test, that one there is measuring salinity. We won't cover it in detail today, but you can see how they've got a different unit again. Salinity is measured in this thing called DS/M. So it's a different unit altogether. It's not measured as milligrams per kilogram at all. So that's the salinity unit of measurement. So you can see a good soil test should have the units of measurement on it. That's really important. And again, if I go to the alternative test from Inside Tech Pivot, just to show you something different, you can see that Inside Tech usually put their units in a separate column to make it really clear. Okay, I'm measuring salinity. What's the unit of measurement? Decisiemens. There it is in its own column. What's it measuring phosphorus in? Milligrams per kilogram, also known as parts per million. So you can see that all good labs will clearly lay out your, will clearly lay out your units of measurement for each of the things. And that's important when you're benchmarking as well. So obviously the next thing that's on a soil test, the fourth key element, are the results. If they haven't put the results on, then you're in trouble. So you can see here that you guys in this course, Anne's ordered on the soil test for you organic matter, how much organic matter is on your test, and that's just below pH. Near the top of the test, you'll see estimated organic matter. So she's asked the lab to measure that, and you guys have paid for that, or whoever's paid for it, the project. And then you can see they've given you the result. So the first soil has 0.8% organic matter, the second soil 1.0, the third soil has 0.9% organic matter. So you can see the different results. So I know it might sound really obvious, but sometimes you'll get your soil test back and for some reason there was an error in the lab and the result is missing for something, and you're going, well, that's useful because that's what I wanted to learn about. So it doesn't happen often, but just you're getting the results. So that's what you really paid for. And again, if we look at a different tests, this one here, you can see here they've got the results. This is just for a single test. You can see the organic matter for this soil here is 10%. So whereas you guys have organic matter less than 2, down here in southeastern Australia in higher rainfall, this is cold country near a place called Orange and Bathurst, if you know that area of central New South Wales at all, 10% organic matter in the pasture. So very different climate, but it's the same thing. We've got a result. We want to know our result. The last thing that a good soil test often has, not all soil tests have it, but most of them, is this benchmark. So everyone see this benchmark and target. So that's the last thing that you'll see on most soil tests. So again, let's have a look at an EAL test. And you're going to have to mute them, man. They've just come in, John and Susan. Hang on, everyone. I'm just trying to get myself back on track. Where am I? Here we are. Okay, so can everyone see that you've got, if we have a look at this test here, we've got our, let's have a look at phosphorus. Phosphorus is our indicator. Our unit of measurement is parts per million or milligrams per kilogram. The method that we want, or we may want to use, is Colloids phosphorus. Colloids phosphorus. Here's our result. And finally, the EAL system is they give you indicative guidelines. Everyone see that, indicative guidelines? So they've used the word indicative because they don't want you to sue them. They're just general guidelines, again, because it's not black and white, but they're just general guidelines. And the problem with benchmarks is that when a lab gives you generic benchmarks, we know that how come that benchmark, is that relevant for southeastern Australia on high rainfall, high country pastures, or is it relevant for northern Australia dry tropics? rangeland grazing, or what's it relevant for? And so this is the really careful thing with soil tests, is you've got to make sure your benchmarks are relevant. But most soil tests will give you some kind of guidelines or benchmarks, and the tricky thing in using soil tests is to make sure you're using something that's relevant. So they've given you very general ones. If we have another look at this sugarcane field, for example, you can see how the sugarcane lab for the Insitec have done it for sugarcane. Can everyone see up here? They've put a kind of scale on the different to very low, marginal, optimum, high. So they've done it as a scale, and they've also given these colorful bar charts, red and blue and green and all the rest of it. And if it's in the red, well, then you're gonna have to spend money, buy some fertilizer, but they're just telling you that that could be a limiting factor. And you can see even on this particular layout, and not all Insitec tests are laid out exactly like this, you can see how they've also got this optimal. So they're saying you should be between these numbers for your pH. So they're giving, some kind of range as well. So different soils have different ways they lay out benchmarks. I showed you this soil with the pie charts on it, this soil test. You can see that this lab here, they like to use colourful charts to get your hormonal, and you can see that they've done the desirable cation balance. So they've done the desirable pie chart. So if your soil's not in that pie chart, you've got to spend a lot of money to get it there, basically, because your soil's not where you need it to be. But again, it's just a way for them to sort of give you some guidelines. The challenge you have as a landholder or farmer or grazier is to use benchmarks with a great deal of caution, because if you're out of whack, or you think you're out of whack against your benchmark, well, it's a lot of effort. It can be a lot of effort, resources, or inputs that you're spending money and time on to fix a problem. So you've got to be really sure that you have got a problem. But they're the key 5 elements on soil tests. So I might just pull it up at that point and just get everyone to give me a check if that sort of made sense. And so that makes it a little bit easier to have a look. Thanks to Neil. Everyone else sort of give me a thumbs up. Yep, I'm taking it slow. Hopefully I'm not taking it too slow, but it's important to really just step into it. But it doesn't. Yes, Rowan, go for it.
No, that's good. Thank you.
No worries. Great, terrific. So if you have other soil tests, not sure who's on the phone, but I can't hear you on the phone. Hopefully you can hear me, but it's too scratchy coming in from that end. You're going to have to go to Optus or something. Righto. So hopefully that sort of makes sense. And so any soil test you ever get, they should have those 5 elements on them. Sometimes you've got to work out where they are, but you can see they're all laid out slightly differently on different tests. And once you can find those elements on a soil test, it makes it a lot easier, and you follow a logical process, which we're starting tonight, reading soil tests, then you can use them they're a useful tool. So remember those elements and follow a bit of a process, and you won't go too far wrong with soil tests. Remember your golden rules. The key thing about a logical process is a lot of people use a soil test firstly to worry about nutrients like phosphorus and sulfur and all the rest of it. But actually that's kind of down the track. It's a bit like a vehicle. When you get a vehicle and you're looking at whether the vehicle is going to get you to town or not, the first thing you look at is if there's enough wheels on it and the engine's working. You don't worry about fuel in the tank until you've worked out that it's got 4 wheels and it's got an engine that works. So it's the same with soil. You work out whether the soil's functioning before you worry about does it have enough fuel or fertility in it. They're related, but they're separate, and often people jump straight to the fertility. So once you go through that process, you'll start to build your confidence in reading the test for yourself. The good news, if you're in a grazing landscape, is there's not a lot of indicators that you need to keep an eye on. If you're in cropping and horticulture, there's definitely a lot more things you need to be looking at on a soil test. But for grazing landscapes, there's actually just a few things that you need to really worry about. Okay, so are there any burning questions on the sort of ins and outs of reading a soil test? If not, I'll keep going. But if something pops in your mind, pop it up on chat or let us know at the end. But again, just mindful that we've got an hour or just over about 25 minutes to go, 20 to 25. So I'll just keep rolling. But if you do have something, just pull me up. So let's go. Let's now start to use a soil test. Rowan, oh no, someone, the mystery telephone caller, you just got to type it into chat because I can't hear you, I'm afraid. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I think that's you, John. Is that you, John?
Yeah, I can't hear John.
No, I think it's
No.
John, but I'll
Yeah.
put it back on
You
mute.
mightn't be able to chat either, John, because you're on the phone. But what you can do is just send an email through to Anne if you do have a question, and then I can follow it up next week with you too. That's fine to do as well. Or just make a note of it because unfortunately I can't hear you. Okay, so now we're going to practice using the soil test. Here's a couple of cane farmers at Ingham, that are Innisfail, sorry, that are getting their soil test practice happening. So the first thing we can use a soil test for is to assess soil type. So here's a grazier near Bowen. This is Bob Harris, and when we did a field day there a few years ago, he was really keen to know why his different soil types perform differently. The cattle graze them differently, the grasses grow on them differently, they respond differently to different rainfall, and he had about 8 or 9 different soil types. So what we're going to do today is just, and none of them were shit soil, by the way. So what we're going to do today is just go over these soil types. So question for you quickly, how many soil types do you have on your place? So just let me know quickly how many different soils, either hands up or punch it into chat. How many different soil types do you actually manage on your place? 5, Jeff? Yep. Oh, yeah, more than 5. Righto, yep. Yeah, no, look, you can see cane fields that'll have six soil types, three to 6 soil types in the one paddock. So, down on the coast where you've got floodplain country, so it's not uncommon. But yeah, 3 from Jeff. Yep, great. And anyone else got more than 5? That's 5's gone in, not 3. Anyone else got different numbers? How many different soil types are you managing? About 5 as well. Yep, no worries. Yep, 4 to 5 to Neil. Yep, no worries. Yep, so everyone's got more than one by the look of it. There was someone with just Mitchell Grassdowns country, I think, last week. But yeah, so most of the time people have more than one. So let's just quickly go over why you have different soil types, and then we'll practice using a soil test to get a bit more info about your soil type, and then we'll pull it up for the night. So a soil's type mainly comes from the rocks that it forms from, with a little bit of help from a few other things like climate and rainfall and vegetation, but the soil type mainly comes from the rocks. So this is an example for you of a really young soil. You guys don't have a young landscape, relatively speaking. It's a bit older, but this is a very young landscape in New South Wales. It's on the Liverpool range. So if you've ever been to the Liverpool Plains, Gunnedah, Tamworth area of New South Wales, so this is the mountain range between the Liverpool Plains and the Hunter Valley, and it's quite a young geological mountain range. And you can see here, this is the topsoil, and the topsoil still full of rocks. So those rocks haven't yet fully broken down. So it is a topsoil. It's just a topsoil that still have rocks in it. So we know that it's a young landscape because it's full of rocks, basically. So through a process called weathering, rocks break down into minerals. So rocks break down into minerals through something called weathering, and it's these minerals that really define your soil's type. So this is granite country, granite rock country, and the high country in New South Wales. And you can see it's a very different pattern of soil to the one we just saw. And so that soil we saw before was volcanics, and this is a granite or plutonic rock. And this is from up your way when I was doing the workshops up there a few years ago. So there's certain things, I won't get you, I'll just answer it for you just because of a time point of view, but there's certain things that your soil inherits from its minerals that they're what we call make up its soil type. And here are the guys having a look in depth at the soils out there when we dug a soil pit. But the main things that your soil inherits from its minerals is its color. You can see here this bright red high iron soil. You can also see it's got these mottling white things through it, which is quite typical of many arid soils or semi-arid soils, including up your way. So this white calcium-based mineralogy, but you can see the high iron content, the red iron. The other thing that a soil inherits from its minerals is texture, mineral composition, which we're going to go over in a minute, how much phosphorus and calcium and sulfur is in the soil, and this what we call the soil colloid, which I'll just briefly touch on. So those four things are strongly inherited mainly from the soil's minerals, your soil's minerals. So they're what we call your soil's type, because they don't change much over time. You've just got to live with them. So the first one is total fertility, which is also known as the mineral composition. This is some soils out near Charleville, and even out there, there's great variation in soil type. But the mineral composition, or the total level of nutrients in the soil, both available and unavailable, comes from the soil's minerals. So let's have a look at that. If you'd like to grab your test and go right to the bottom, the last section of your test, you'll see this section of the test that has these totals on it. It's right at the bottom. Everyone found it? The bottom, yep. All good. Thanks to Neil. So everyone hopefully has found that totals. And you can see here, this first soil's got a total calcium of 52,000. This second soil, we've got a soil over here though, number K, I'll come up and see whose it is in a minute, with 473 total calcium. So just in your group, you've got two very different soil types going on there. Can everyone see the vast difference in the mineral composition or the overall fertility of those two soil types? If we just on phosphorus, this soil's got heaps of calcium. It's got 325 parts per million total, estimated total phosphorus. And this soil over here has got 97 total phosphorus. This soil here next to it's got 371 total phosphorus, but it doesn't have as much calcium as that first soil. So you can see that the different soils have different levels of fertility. We can do the same thing with all of the nutrients. Zinc, here's your zinc, an essential trace element, 180 in the first soil, 46 in the second. So you can see that different soil types have very different mineral compositions, or what we call total fertility, levels of overall fertility. And if I show you these soils out of the Northern Territory, the red shit, white shit, and yellow shit, let's have a look at them. You can have a look at the total calcium in the Katherine area, 328. In this soil up there, they only got 182 total calcium. So you get the feeling, you know why they're calling it that four-letter word. And then you can see the total phosphorus in the soils too. This soil's got less than 50 total phosphorus. So does everyone see that your soil inherits from its minerals an overall level of fertility? And that overall level of fertility is what we call the mineral composition of your soil. And that profoundly affects vegetation, carrying capacity, nutrient value of the forage, animal feeding behavior. If you're cropping, it affects yield potential. Everything is influenced by this overall fertility. And I'll just show you this handout here. So this is 9 different soils from across Eastern Australia. If you have a look, 1 to 9, they're just different soils, and we've measured the total on them. And if you have a look at, I'll just get a bit closer. If you have a look at the total calcium, you can see that the largest calcium out of all these soils is this soil near Gatton in southeast Queensland, like near Lowood. Most of you know the Brisbane Valley. It's got 5,000 total calcium. That's relatively high. So you can see that in your area of Australia, your calcium levels on most of the soils are actually amongst the highest in the world. So you guys have many of those cracking black soils, the Brigalow country, those volcanic derived soils actually have some of the highest calcium levels on the planet in topsoil. And that's just naturally how they're formed, and because of the climate as well. Whereas you can see here, if we look at the tropics, this is near Cairns, on a granite soil near Cairns, 4 meters of rainfall a year. The total calcium is 85. So everyone knows where that calcium's gone. It's gone out to the barrier reef, but don't tell that to the people doing the modelling on the barrier reef. That's a natural thing. The calcium moves out to sea, and then the corals will use it, or it'll sit on the bottom of the ocean and turn into a lime, but a lot of sea creatures will use it. But you can see the vast difference there. And in fact, that's a commercial tropical flowers farm. So just because it's low fertility doesn't mean it can't be productive. Yeah, Jeff, I'll come back to that. I'll have to come back to that another night, but the calcium can certainly still be available because it's not just the pH that influences calcium cycling. So I'll have to come back to that another night because it's a bit of a technical one. But yeah, so just coming back to the totals, you can see that just because it's low fertility doesn't mean I can't make money from it. I just have to manage it within its limitations. Just like the tropical soils in North Queensland, in Katherine, they're very low fertility soils in Katherine, but you can still make money from them if you know how to manage them well. So that's what we call, yeah, no worries, Roger. I'm happy to go a bit longer too. So soil type, so that's mineral composition, and it does influence grazing behaviour, potential fertility in your country. The second thing that your soil inherits from its minerals is what we call the soil's texture, which is the proportion of sand, silt and clay. So some of you guys will have quite medium clay type soils. There's no sand to be seen in it. And that's because of the way the type of rocks, excuse me, and the way that the rocks have weathered into minerals. So if we have a look at your soils, if you have a look at your soil test, you'll see just above the totals, they've put texture there. So everyone see they've given you a basic texture. So you can see it on your soil test that they've got basic texture. So they haven't done a full, what I call professional texture test. They've just done what you call a very quick and easy one. And they've said you kind of got, these soils have got clay loam. But this soil here, that's, I'm not sure whose soil this is. We better find out whose soil that one is. So soil number K. So soil number K is grazing sandy forest country. Yeah. So I'm not sure whose soil. That's Luke's by the look of it. Is it Luke?
That's Luke Westaway.
Yep. So Luke, that's obviously a sandy textured soil. And well, it sounds like it is from what you've described. And you can see that they've just called it clay loam, which is probably a bit misleading. And that's because this particular measurement that this lab does is what they call basic. It's not the full proper test. I don't think they should actually put it on here because it can be a bit misleading, but they keep doing it. So anyway, we'll take it. But the best way to do texture is with your hands. And there's a ribbon test. It's called the ribbon test. And Anne can send you a video on how to test your texture in the paddock. It's really easy to do. And if I just show you one last example of a test, if I can find it, let's go back to our sugarcane field. You can see here they've also measured the texture for them and they've worked out that the soil is clay. So you'll notice that they've measured clay for them and they haven't scored it. They haven't given a benchmark for it. How can you benchmark soil type? It's just what you have. It's not good or bad. It's just I've got a clay soil or a sandy soil. So they've just put information only. They can't say, oh, you need more sand in it, or it's just the type of soil you're dealing with. So that's why they haven't benchmarked. You can see they haven't put any benchmark for texture because it's a property of soil type, which you can't really score. It's just what you have. So hopefully that makes sense. Yeah, so let's keep going. So the third thing, apart from color, which we don't, it's pretty self-evident your color, unless you're colorblind like me. The third thing that's really critical for particularly cropping that is a part of soil type is this thing called the soil colloid. I'm not going to go too far into it because it is 8:30 on a weeknight and colloids get messy. But it's basically a charge in your soil. So believe it or not, your soil on its colloids has this thing called an electrostatic charge. It's a surface charge on the surface of clay and humus in your soil, which are collectively called colloids. So think of milk. Everyone knows what milk is. Milk is actually fat in suspension. So when fat is in suspension, it's behaving as what we call a colloid, and it has a charge on it. So if you think about a cup of milk, those fat molecules have got an electric charge on their surface. That's why they're not settling out. As soon as you put lime juice or vinegar in the milk, what happens to it? You crack that charge and the milk the solids separate. So colloids, your soil has colloids. It is an important property of your soil, and I'll show you how to look at it on your soil test. So if you go down about halfway down your test, you'll see this thing called effective cation exchange capacity, or CEC, or ECEC they use, but CEC is the jargon you're looking for. And can everyone see that you've got a number? So 41 for that first soil, 48, 54. So these are all high clay content soils. And we know that they're high in clay and in particular types of clay because they have a big charge. But that forest soil that Luke's got, has got a charge of 4.1. And immediately, without me visiting that site, I know that it's going to be either a different clay type that has a low charge, or it's going to be a sandy texture. So does everyone sort of make sense? So you guys have quite large charges. Now, if you're in a grazing landscape, you're not going to be influencing this. It's not too big a deal. Don't worry too much about it. But if you're cropping or you're in horticulture, it's relevant because it influences fertilizer rates and soil amendment rates. So it's more relevant in agriculture than grazing. But does everyone see, if I come back over here, the unit of measurement? Does everyone see the unit of measurement? It's called C-moles per kilogram. So that's actually a charge. It's measuring the charge on those colloids in your soil, the clay and the humus. So that's how it's measured. It's an electrostatic charge. And before you ask me if it's affected by lightning, I don't believe it is, but it's certainly an area for someone to do a PhD on. But it's just the surface charge in your soil. And I'll just show you a couple of others just to give you a bit of perspective. Let's look at the Northern Territory soils that are very low, light soils. If we go up to their CEC, you can see that the round Catherine on those quite sandy soil types with no fertility, look at their charges. So when you get to 1, you're talking beach sand. So Roger, basically chickpeas can grow in a range of CECs or charge sizes. So you can grow most crops in different CECs, even say these Catherine crops, but it influences how you fertilize them is probably a better way to answer it. So most crops, unless they really don't like sandy soil, which I'm not sure chickies are happy in sandy soil, I think they'd like a slightly heavier texture. But yeah, so the C-mole size directly doesn't always influence crops, some crops favoring or not. It's more the texture, and it influences how much and how the rates of fertilizer in particular, and fertility management. So that's probably more how, hopefully that helps answer that, Roger. But yeah, so you can see these Catherine soils have a very small CEC, but let's be really clear, it doesn't necessarily mean they're bad, it just means they're a small CEC. You have to manage the soil type. So it's like texture and color. If you don't like red soils, oh, I don't want this soil, it's red, too bad. It's just, you've got to live with it. And it's the same with CEC. What it means is you have to manage them differently than those big CEC soils. They require different management. And the same with the texture, as you guys know, heavy clay soils, tillage and grazing management and irrigation, it's different on different textured soils. And just to give you a feel for the different, those 9 soils, here's the soil at Gatton, 45. It's a heavy black cracking soil. Here's that soil in North Queensland. This one here, number 5, is a red soil near Innisfail. You know, those bright red high iron soils near Innisfail, if you've ever been up there. Potato growing country in Victoria would be the same. They look like they're clay, but they actually have a CEC like sand. They're very deceiving, those soils. They look like they're full of clay and they've got a charge, but they don't. Okay, so let's keep going. So we're getting towards the end. So there's 3 things that you can pick off a soil test to help you understand soil type, and that is overall fertility, which we had a quick look at. And you guys have quite high levels of calcium in your soils, but not necessarily high levels of other things. Some of them moderate levels, some probably low. And then the texture, the sand, silt and clay, and you guys often have quite clay soils in that part of Australia, although you do get the sand ridges and desert upland country and all the rest of it. So there are sand pockets. And this third thing on your soil, which is this charge, CEC. And some people will say, oh, a big charge is better than a small. It's actually, they're just different. You just have to manage them differently because they both have their pros and cons. So I guess in a nutshell, if we're looking back at those Northern Territory soils, we wouldn't say they're yellow shit, white shit and red shit. What we'd say is they're sandy soils with a small CEC and bugger all fertility. So we'd get more specific. They've got very little fertility, they're small CEC and they're sandy, but they can make money from them. You can grow Rhodes grass hay on them. You can grow mangoes on them. So just because you just have to manage to the soil type. And that's the key message I'm trying to get across here tonight. So your soil type doesn't change much under management. You can change organic matter, you can change pH, you can change structure, you can change ground cover, but your mineral composition, your CEC, you can modify it a little bit. I'll go over that next week. And your texture doesn't change much. It's just what you've got to have. Knowing your soil type's important because it influences every decision you make, whether it's irrigation, grazing, rainfall response, vegetation, they're all influenced by soil type. Your soil type's not good or bad, it is what it is. So you've just got to live with it and manage within its capacity. If you don't like the soil types on your place, then my only answer to that is, why did you buy it? So, and this is the key thing. People often buy country and sometimes they know about the soil type, but if it's a district that's very different, if you move to a different district or buy a block in a very different district that you're not familiar with, you know, different soils behave differently. So it's always good to get some local knowledge. Because, you know, down here where I live in southeastern Australia, in the temperate, cool sort of pasture country, people with sandy, both sandy and heavy clay soils, the sandy country usually responds better to small amounts of rain, like grass grows quickly after small amounts of rain, whereas the heavy clay country takes a lot more rainfall to get the grass to grow. And that's a property of texture. And in grazing landscapes, it influences that the soil type, particularly the mineral composition, influences the grazing behaviour. So this is the lava flow country, sort of north of Charters Towers on the way to the Atherton. And when the owners of this place, they brought cattle from to the west on low phosphorus country. I think it was around Aramac or Alpha, I can't remember. But they brought cattle up, and out in that other country, the cattle were chewing bones and doing all of the behaviours they do on low phosphorus country. As soon as they put them on this lava flow country, they stopped chewing bones straight away, because this country's full of phosphorus. So it's got about 3,000 total phosphorus, 3,000. So compare that to your total phosphorus. And you can see here, you guys, your total phosphorus, the maximum total phosphorus you guys have, you got 325 there, so you got 97 there. So the total phosphorus on that lava flow country is 3,000. So it's oodles of phosphorus in the landscape. And so you can see that it influences grazing behaviour. And we control animals and make them stay in different land types. But if it was in the wild, they're just going to move around and regulate their own rumen. And in cropping paddocks, that soil type and the mineral composition, texture and CEC, it influences irrigation, tillage, fertiliser decisions, yield potential. And it definitely, Roger, will influence choice of crops too, because some crops prefer a heavier textured soil, which usually is a larger CEC anyway, because it's got more clay in it. So yeah, they kind of are related. But a lot of horticulture crops and other crops like wheat, you know, you can grow wheat across a whole range of soil types. But some of the Desmanthus and Leucaena and stuff, they prefer a heavier texture, which usually has a larger CEC most of the time anyway. So what we've done tonight, if there's any burning questions on soil type, feel free to throw them at me now. Just turn your mic on or punch it into chat. But what we've done is looked at the basics of a soil type, but also we've looked at how to use a soil test. So I've just started you to practice reading a soil test. So hopefully that's been a good sort of entry into just finding the numbers and, okay, texture or total phosphorus, and having a look at that. Any questions or comments? I've got John on the phone who I can't hear. I'm sorry, John. It's a challenge for me. But if anyone else can hear John and wants to relay the question, that's all good. Yeah, it's a bit frustrating, John, but please write it down because I'm happy to deal with it next time for sure. I just can't hear him at all. And I've got these fancy new headphones too. Yeah, any other questions or comments? No, everyone's done really well to get through soil test reading at 8:40 at night. I'm impressed. No other questions or comments at this stage. Okay, so what we've done today is three things. We've looked at why you'd use a soil test. Then we've looked at the golden rules, I call them, of using a test. Take your sample properly, get a good holistic set of indicators, use a professional lab. Just generally, do a good job in taking the sample and getting the test done. Excuse me. And then we've used a soil test. Oh, and those 5 parts to a soil test: indicators, method, unit of measurement, benchmark. What's the other one? Anyway, there's 2 more. You guys will remember it. It's getting a bit late for me too. And then the third thing we've done is to look at soil type using a test, just to start. And that will help you making decisions. So again, Roger, if you're starting to look at growing different opportunity crops or getting serious with a pivot irrigator and, investing money and time, knowing soil type and what crops are suited to soil types is a really important first step. And often people do, how much phosphorus should I buy? But that's the last thing you should be thinking about. But unfortunately, in commercial agronomy, people go to there's quick spend stuff first, but that's just the way of the modern world. So the first thing to know is soil type and what are the crops that are going to suit my soil type. Depth, yeah, Roger. Well, it is important too. I don't bring it in so much in here because soil testing, it's an introductory session, but what you do, definitely, if you are going to invest in cropping or whatever, opening up some country for some crops, then definitely see how deep your topsoil is. That's really important. And it's also worthwhile sometimes, depending on how uniform the soil is as you go down. So if there's an abrupt change in soil pattern or horizon, we call it, it's definitely worth getting a basic test for pH and a few things like sodium on that second level, because they could be what we call soil constraints. And you'll think, oh yeah, this soil's all right. And then you try and grow some stuff. And as soon as the roots hit that next layer, the show's over. So doing the due diligence before you invest in the pivot and all the effort. In my consultancy career, I've had situations where people have bought $10 million, $5 million properties without doing a soil test, and they've regretted it for the rest of their life, because they've had major soil issues that no one told them about, and they bought the property thinking, oh, it's just soil. So definitely, if you're going to spend quite a bit of effort and money to go into a new enterprise, particularly a cropping enterprise, do spend a couple of $100 and get an agro to look at the soil test and do that due diligence. It's not even $1,000 worth of consultancy and a couple of soil tests. It's cheap when you think about what you're trying to get out of it. So definitely do. And that's my concern with opening up Northern Australia. I've got no problem with us opening up more agriculture in Northern Australia, but we've just got to do it on the right soil types, because I've seen it around the world, because I've worked in Asia as well, and where they don't do the due diligence, it's a white elephant. So that's what we definitely don't want. So hopefully that helps you. Reading soil tests takes time and practice. It's you guys are all starting on level 1, or most of you, but it does take a bit of time. So hopefully through the 3 or 4 webinars, you'll get a bit of practice. But just remember that process, step by step. Okay, once I know my soil type, I don't need to do that every year because it's not going to change, but I'm just following this process of reading my indicator, benchmarking, etc. And that's what we're going to keep following as we go through the webinars. So any final burning questions? Now's the time to throw them up. Otherwise, I might or even other questions not related to tonight, throw them at Anne. And John, yeah, I do apologise, but I just couldn't hear you at all, so I didn't want to hold things up from that angle. But please get them through to Anne, and that way we can deal with them. Otherwise, I'll stop sharing the screen and hand it back to Anne. And thanks everyone for coming on. No worries, Neil. You're welcome.
You there, David?
Yes. Who's that?
That's
Yeah, Jeff here, David.
Oh, Jeff.
Yeah,
yep.
just
yep.
No doubt. Everyone's thinking the same. Through the process, we will get to a stage where we'll know how to use the information.
Yep.
In our own environment. That's.
Yeah. I've talked with Dan about this. The problem with me, and like my job's extension, and that's what I do for a living, is I've got to give you some fundamentals. It's a tool, and once I give you the fundamentals of the tool, you'll be able to use it more confidently for yourself. But what we're aiming for is so next time and the one after, we'll get specific about things like, all right, well, start to identify my limiting factors, which then help you decide on decisions for sure. And I guess soil type, it sounds very general, but it does help you really get an overall picture of the capacity of the different soils. And that's a really important first step. But yeah, so because I've got your soil tests and we've got them, and you guys know the paddock history and the paddock situation, we can go over, we can find out what you want to do on those paddocks or what are some of the issues you have, and try and troubleshoot for you what's going on. Yeah, that's certainly where we want to get to. But I'm not the kind of person that would like to overload you and try and get you to the end in one night, because I'll be overloaded as well as you guys. And I don't usually use PowerPoints, but I'm not a big fan of giving people 500 things in 1 hour and expecting them to go away sort of with it all sorted. So I'd rather just pace it out. But yeah, definitely that's what we'd like to do. If sodium's an issue, or the pH is going to be a problem, or you're thinking to open some country up or improve country with legumes, what's the right way to go about it? That's where we want to get to.
Yeah, great. Because we just got just a quick look at our results. There's some unique results there that Anne and Roger and Anita will appreciate on the different land types, and it's not ringing true. So it's going to be interesting to unpack that when we get there.
So which is your soil then? Which one's, just so I know for down the track?
Bandura.
Wearing Bandura.
Okay,
Blue
got him.
Bush and there's a red bank paddock there. That's up on the desert uplands.
Okay. Yep.
I think
it's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
If we need to at the end, everyone will end up having a fourth webinar just to go through everyone's what they're looking at, so they can explain which soil sample was from where and what they were hoping to achieve from looking at it. So if we do need to go a fourth webinar, hopefully we can do that. So that we can really address everyone's particular samples and what their issues are and why they were trying to, collect that sample.
And Jeff, I really hate being an expert giving you a black and white recommendation, and because I'm an extensionist by trade, and so my job's to sort of help build your skills up. But I know that you're itching to get some answers, and I'm happy to help you get those answers. Don't get me wrong. But my job's to try and help you build confidence to use a soil test for going forward, not just for this, this time as well. But it is a big topic. It is a big topic.
Exactly. Yeah. And I guess I wasn't. There's going to be more. I'm going to get more out of these soil samples than what I envisaged, I guess. Which is exciting.
Good. Yeah, no, I'm glad. Yeah, look, I do the main extension I do up in North Queensland. I do a 6 month or one day a month for 6 months course called Digging Deeper. We do, all around the place, and it takes that much time to get people, to the point where they're confident to read their own tests and make their own decisions. And, those are full days when we're in paddocks, talking and sharing information with each other, learning from other blokes, other people. So yeah, it is a big topic. I'm under no illusions, but yeah, no, I'm glad that you're getting something from it so far, and we'll just keep keep going step by step into it, because you guys have very unique soils. Tropical soils and dry tropical soils of Northern Australia, they're quite unique compared to everywhere else. I mean, other areas have extreme problems, no doubt about it. But yeah, they are quite a unique set of soils that we're dealing with.
Okay.
Thanks, David.
No worries, you're welcome.
Righto, has anyone else got
Thanks,
any
Luke.
questions?
No, I think that's it.
Righto, that's great. Thanks very much, David. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for giving up your time tonight. And it'll be same time, same place next week. Very good. Thank you. Good night, all.
Good night, Anne. Thanks, David. Good night, all.